Gerald, I think you're a friend.
I am you and you are me, I see. We might survive as brothers, yet all perish here as fools. Don't waste your best, don't get too soon. Yeah, you might find me in another, feels like someone you was new. You know that face, yeah, we all do. We might survive as brothers, yet all perish here as fools. Don't waste your best, don't get too soon. Yeah, you might find me.
To Link TV's viewers, the world's best. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Harry Belafonte, and this is Link TV.
These men are about to attack a cocaine factory. They're expecting a fight. They're the drugs police of Colombia.
Colombia has faced a 40-year terrorist threat and a 30-year narco-trafficking threat. For all that period, the two have fed off each other.
America's here, helping on the front line, but it's being drawn into a tangled conflict where success is difficult to define.
You've got the armed guerrilla groups, you've got the paramilitaries, you've got the government, you've got the drug trafficking.
America's plowing in billions of dollars and even its own troops. But this is a conflict where some of the most brutal armies in the world have become the most powerful cocaine traffickers. High above the Colombian jungle, these men prepare for combat. They're called the Junglers, or jungle men. Their mission is to destroy a cocaine laboratory, hidden somewhere down there. On board with us is a man who used to work in the laboratory, but who's now turned informant. He points out the heavily camouflaged site. A flare's sent down to guide the helicopters in. Then there's incoming fire and the Junglers respond. America helps train and finance these units and even sends its own men with them, armed and ready to fight. Why? Because Colombia is the main supplier of cocaine to the US, accounting for around 90% of it. The informant's at the front, normal procedure, in case he's a double agent leading the Junglers into an ambush. But it seems the gunmen have fled. They left in a hurry, washing still on the line. Personal belongings scattered. Food still on plates. They've still got to tread very carefully around here because sometimes the people who leave here, who flee into the jungle, leave booby traps and mines around the place.
Stand up, come on here.
Nearby, barrels of chemicals used to process coca leaves into cocaine. This cocaine laboratory would produce about 2 tons of cocaine every week. In London prices, that's about £100 million worth. In other words, 8 weeks of work here and you'd be able to buy Manchester United Football Club. And labs like this in Colombia, there are hundreds of them. Among this special unit, a former American colonel, now employed by the US government to help on the front line. In terms of others you've seen, how big is this?
Well, this is pretty good. this is a little smaller, but yet it's got all the components of a lab. So this is a decent lab today.
The people who own this laboratory are part of the largest cocaine trafficking organization in the world. They control the drug at every level of production. They're also paramilitaries, fighters in Colombia's 40-year conflict.
This area is strategic for the paramilitaries because coca grows very well here. Also, they have easy access to the sea to move the drug out of the country. And they are very near Ecuador, where they cross to hide.
Once the lab's been searched, the Junglers make sure no one can use it again. The mission relied on the intelligence provided by the informant flying with us. 6 weeks after we filmed, he was attacked, shot dead on a street in Bogota, probably by men connected to the laboratory, the paramilitaries. We'd been invited to meet one of their leaders. We were told to drive north, where we'd find him in a jungle camp. The paramilitaries are called the AUC, the Self-Defense Force of Colombia. They weren't always drug traffickers. Originally, they were the private army of wealthy landowners hired to defend their property from these men, the FARC. The FARC are the Marxist guerrillas who've been fighting to overthrow the Colombian government for 4 decades. The two sides became ideological opponents, fighting for control of land and government. We found the paramilitary, or AUC camp, on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. Many of these men have been involved in massacres. Armies need money. A decade ago, the paramilitaries decided cocaine was the solution. So, in the areas they controlled, they began taxing the peasants who grew coca, the raw material for cocaine. How important is the cocaine market in Colombia for the funding of your paramilitaries?
The paramilitaries survived thanks to the economies of those regions where they exist. In those areas where there is coca production, we tax coca. But the paramilitaries haven't initiated the production of coca. Coca is part of the economy of the conflict. It is not a secret that coca production is the fuel of this conflict. They said drug trafficking even elected presidents in Colombia. Drug trafficking didn't leave any spheres of the Colombian society without penetrating them. We're just a small part of the drug trafficking chain, taxing coca in the areas where it is planted.
In reality, it goes far further than just taxing the growers. The paramilitaries themselves are traffickers. They're said to control around 70% of the cocaine in Colombia. That's more than half the cocaine in the world. Diego Vecino himself is wanted in America on suspicion of drug trafficking, and in Colombia for murder. In one incident, he's accused of ordering 25 men to be killed with rocks and sledgehammers.
The conflict we are fighting between guerrillas and paramilitaries had its roots in the social problem of the country. Drug trafficking arrived at some point during the conflict. But this conflict is not a product of drug trafficking.
But for both sides, ideological differences have become less important than the fight for control of cocaine.
Overwhelmingly, they fund themselves through narcotics trafficking. Indeed, we see that terrorist organizations that once had ideological agendas, although they claim to still have them, more and more are simply narco-traffickers. We, in fact, have seen agreements between the so-called far-left FARC and the so-called far-right paramilitaries about coca territories and how they're going to market their product.
You mean they cooperate with each other?
They certainly reach agreements with each other. They certainly buy and sell to each other in the trade of in the chain of production and ultimately sale of the product.
At the bottom of that chain of production are the coca growers. Control of their fields is fought over between the FARC and the paramilitaries. Nariño is the largest coca growing region in the country. The vice governor took us to meet one of the growers.
Coca has been produced in Nariño for more than 25 years, but unfortunately, in the last 12 years, there has been an enormous increase in the production of coca. This fact has brought many violence-related problems, political instability, lack of governability, and a fall in the levels of education. The children prefer to harvest coca instead of going to school.
This area could sustain dozens of different crops. We see only coca. In an isolated valley, we meet Elias Vivas. He lives in a tiny log cabin with his family of 6. At harvest time, men appear with guns.
The buyer changes every time. We don't know them. Sometimes they don't pay us and we end up in debt with the workers. That's one of our main problems.
Like any job in the cocaine business, his is dangerous. Coca growers are regularly murdered for selling to the wrong side. His customers this year are the paramilitaries. They'll buy his coca leaves and take them to a small facility where they'll be pulped. The resulting paste will be moved to the kind of laboratory we've seen in the jungle. You know that growing coca is illegal, so why do you do it?
Because otherwise we have no other means of subsistence. Someone show me how to do it. They've been doing it for 30 years. I'm just starting.
Coca isn't native to Colombia, but the conflicts become dependent on it. The growers, the lab workers, the traffickers, all making a product almost entirely for export. It's users in London, New York, LA that keep this conflict alive. They've helped finance a war which has seen paramilitaries execute entire villages, burning some alive, decapitating others. Which has seen the FARC carry out similar atrocities. A conflict in which 70,000 have been killed, most of them civilians. It's into this chaos that the government invited America to intervene with the launch of Plan Colombia. This elite group of police were created at the start of Plan Colombia, initially to tackle the drugs problem, but latterly also to tackle the left-wing guerrillas and the right-wing paramilitaries. America has invested $3 billion on Plan Colombia, helping to train and finance the narco police and the military for 5 years. The number of US military personnel and contractors has risen to 1,400, and they think it's working.
The figures that we are most confident of are the figures on what we have destroyed in the field and what we have seized with the Colombians. Those numbers are absolutely certain, and we know that the numbers of the amount of drugs that we're taking away from the bad guys and preventing from getting to market is going up dramatically.
Alongside the military involvement, America's engaged in crop spraying on an unprecedented scale. Each flight needs military backup. Every year, several hundred missions are hit by hostile fire. If they come down, the crew are invariably kidnapped or killed. America says the spraying's a success.
We have a very refined technical capability. We hit the target we aim at. The pilots are under strict instructions, and it's tracked by computer so we can check afterwards where we were and where we sprayed.
The US says spraying has reduced areas of coca plantations dramatically. So does the United Nations. It's these figures which are normally used to argue that Plan Colombia is working.
I confirm Plan Colombia is working because it's focusing on the substance. So they want to destroy crop. It works. It reduces the crop. It reduced the crop 15%, 51% in 5 years.
You'd expect a 51% reduction to have a significant impact on the cocaine market. But street prices in the UK and the US are falling, normally an indication there's more of it around. Is the United Nations correct in its estimate of cocaine production in this region?
No, I don't think the UN observations are correct. On the contrary, in Nariño, I've seen that the hectares of coca have continued to increase.
Fabio thinks in his area there's 4 times more coca than the UN has discovered. Crops can be hidden from satellites by cloud cover and trees. Then there are variables like the number of harvests, the quality of crop, and the efficiency of production, which can all throw estimates out. It does seem to suggest that all figures on this are inherently unreliable. There are just too many variables here.
There are extremely many variables. There are too many variables, and these variables, only a limited part of them can really be proved by evidence.
So no figure here is really reliable, is it?
Correct.
I can confirm that we, in fact, have sprayed in the last 6 months more coca in Nariño province than our estimates had shown were originally there. The estimates are estimates. We have the best estimates in the world. The UN has the second best estimates in the world. And they disagree by a substantial amount. They do agree, however, on the trend line, and the trend line is down. And we're confident that that's the case.
18 months ago, Elias Vivas was working in his coca field when a spray plane came into view. It destroyed his entire crop. What effect did that have on you?
Spraying affected me economically and socially, because we didn't have anything to eat, and we were hungry. We can't plant anything else now, because it doesn't grow.
The point is, it didn't stop him from growing coca. Even though Plan Colombia offers incentives for farmers to grow other crops, he's never heard of it. And with 4 harvests a year and a guaranteed market, no other crop can compete. 3 months after the spraying, his new coca was ready to harvest. To him, it just meant going without food for 3 months. It didn't stop the problem. It just meant he had to go without food.
Well, it is entirely possible that on the consuming end, somebody wasn't killed by the coca that he was producing.
Unfortunately, the spraying affects the most weak link in the chain, so I don't think that's fair. I think it could be another things to do, but not the spraying the farmers, the little farmers, because they are only surviving.
As long as he continues growing coca, the FARC and the paramilitaries will continue fighting over it. There's little sign that Plan Colombia has affected them. Whilst we were there, the FARC attacked government forces, killing 22 soldiers, the largest loss of life under the current president. And then there's the paramilitaries. They've tripled in size since Plan Colombia began. We set off west, across the Andes, for a region called Choco, through which most of Colombia's cocaine is trafficked. This river is used by both sides in the conflict to move their shipments of cocaine out to the Pacific coast, and from there in speedboats to Mexico and on to America. Such a key artery brings with it fighting. The villages along the banks are caught in the crossfire. Entire populations flee. With us is Eduardo Quay. He's here for the United Nations, dealing with the largest refugee crisis outside Africa.
So this is one of several abandoned towns, about 400 people here. You can see there's just nothing.
It's eerie, isn't it? There's nobody here.
There are about 3 other villages along this part of the river, which is a very insecure area. We have both the Colombian military here, but also you've got guerrillas. Nobody really controls this area.
One day the fighting came so close, the village elders gave the order to leave. Once uprooted, the population are known as internally displaced. Not all are fleeing the fighting. Some abandon their villages because of Plan Colombia's crop spraying. In the last 5 years, the number of internally displaced has climbed to around 3 million, almost half the population of London on the move. When you stand in a ghost town like this, why do you think there's any relevance for Plan Colombia?
Well, the relevance is that Plan Colombia has led to an increase in the internal displacement, and internal displacement results in what we see around here. So it has exacerbated the internal displacement.
Now, the Americans, of course, will say that's rubbish. It hasn't exacerbated it at all. In fact, the spraying and the fighting was all going on before they came. In fact, they're improving the situation.
Well, we do not believe that the situation is improving.
Back on the river, more boats of internally displaced make their way to relative safety. We're looking for the refugees from the ghost town. We find them at Bella Vista. Gunfire can be heard in the nearby jungle, but they feel safer here than back home. It's a cramped hodgepodge of huts and hurriedly assembled prefabs, a town acting as a waiting room. These people here fled the town that we've just visited, and they're a tiny minority of the internal refugees here. In fact, this used to be a town of 1,000 people, and now it's a town of 3,000. The internal refugees triple the size of it. Fidela arrived here 3 months ago.
Muy triste porque it is sad because the civilians always pay for it. They try to fight near town so they can use civilians as shields. So we have to pay for it.
During heavy fighting, hundreds hid in the church. The paramilitaries used it as a shield. The FARC fired a shell. It hit the church, killing 119. Do you blame cocaine or coca plantations for the fact that you're here now?
What I understand is that we are displaced so they can transport their drugs. After we move, they take control of the land and move the drugs around.
The UNHCR say that Plan Colombia has exacerbated the internal refugee situation in Colombia.
There is certainly, I just don't believe that. I don't believe that at all.
Well, they're adamant about it. They're not saying that it's completely created the situation, of course, because it was pre-existing.
By Plan Colombia, do you mean our assistance to rural development?
I mean,
so
our assistance overall Plan Colombia, they mean spraying and intensification of armed conflict.
If the assertion is that it would be best to allow coca production to flourish in the countryside of Colombia, either for Colombia or for the consuming countries, I think that's a wrong assertion.
The internally displaced can't return home unless there's increased security. That means more government troops to protect them or a reduction in fighting for other reasons. And there may be a glimmer of hope. Large numbers of right-wing paramilitaries are offering to demobilize. In return, they want immunity from extradition to the US and the right to keep the fortunes they've accumulated through cocaine.
Bueno, buenas tardes. Hoy estamos encontrando una autodefensa con más de 5.000 hombres ya en dejación de armas y casi 6.000 cuando nosotros la semana entrante muy seguramente estemos entregándole el fusil al Estado. Nos espera un futuro mejor, nos espera un futuro al lado de nuestras familias, al lado de nuestras madres, hermanos, esposa, hijos. Tenemos que llenarnos de mucha paciencia y solidaridad. Paciencia para entender.
But the lure of the drug is so strong, many believe they'll merely hand in their uniforms and become civilian cocaine barons. For now, though, the brigade we met is handing in its guns, most of them American-made. America has agreed to extend Plan Colombia for another year, but there's disturbing evidence the corrupting power of cocaine has reached even their own servicemen, those who train the junglers. The ammunition they're using is American, the guns they're using are American, the soldiers who train them here are American, but there are some activities of the American military here in Colombia which they prefer you not to know about. This is the base for several hundred US soldiers. They used to be seen drinking in the town's bars, but now locals have turned against them. In May this year, 2 special servicemen drove their pickup truck to this smart estate on the outskirts of town. Once inside, they prepared to make a deal, an arms deal. They tried to sell 40,000 rounds of ammunition. But, by chance, the house was raided by Colombian police. The 2 soldiers had come here to strike a deal that would benefit the right-wing paramilitaries, the group that's responsible for some of the worst massacres in Colombian history, and it's also a group that's designated as a terrorist organization by the US government. How did you feel about that?
Sad. Mostly sad. I'm the boss, so a little angry.
I mean, it's a very serious offence. We're talking about 40,000 rounds of ammunition, looked as though they were going to the paramilitaries. I mean, ammunition is to kill people. These were your soldiers actually exacerbating an armed crisis in this country.
We don't yet know where this ammunition and other things were going. We do know that the soldiers have been sent home and will be tried.
Most Colombians wanted the 2 American soldiers to be put on trial here for arms trafficking. But they've got immunity, so they were sent home, back to America, where they still haven't been put on trial. It's not only ammunition. Earlier this year, on a military plane like this, 2 American soldiers were caught trying to smuggle cocaine out of the country. Around £1 million worth. Both were returned to the US, where once received 5 years in jail. He'll spend it under house arrest.
I'm not going to speculate on these cases. They are enormously saddening. They are a denial of why we are here. They are a denial of the standards of several hundred American military people who are working very hard. And of course, they're a denial of our close cooperation with Colombia.
I mean, they were here to do the reverse, both these groups of soldiers.
Absolutely.
So what message does that give to the Colombian people?
That we're human too, but we're going to fix the problem.
Whatever criteria are used to judge Plan Colombia, there's one worrying fact that all sides agree on. As America helps tighten the screw here, coca growing has been displaced. Across the borders, into the jungles of Bolivia and Peru. It's called the balloon effect.
It is correct. 17% increase in Bolivia and 14% increase in hectareage in Peru completely replaced the significant reduction in Colombia. So the balloon effect is due to the demand of the market, and there is too much focus on responsibility of Colombia, or Bolivia, or Peru. The actual responsibility are the cocaine users in the United Kingdom, all over Europe. They are the person who are personally responsible of killing Colombian people.
Hi, I'm Marcus James, and you're watching viewer-supported Link TV, television without borders.
And now, music television without borders, as Link TV